you're still looking at it being more expensive for less quality. So if your goal is that, if your goal is nationalism despite the quality and price point, hello, everyone. Today with me, I have James Judson from Druid City Games talking about production and board games and shipping and make it in the USA and all these other conversations. James, I'll just introduce you briefly. For those who don't know, James is from, like I said already, Druid City Games. Just recently finished the Tidal Blades Rise of the Enfolders. This massively successful Kickstarter, did tremendously well. Also a really good game, I know because I played it. And then separately from that, the part of the reason you're here is both in your general background has been in this industry for years now, been on the publisher side of things, and having an insight and a knowledge base that someone like myself does not have. Many people watching this do not have. And then also because over on your recently newly active YouTube channel, you've been diving into a lot of these conversations, and I think that they're really important conversations to have. So first of all, before we dive into it, this conversation is going to be about, well, make it in the USA and wherever that conversation goes. It's a common question that I keep getting. It's time to just make everything in the USA. But then separately, you should go ahead and subscribe to James Judson's channel. I'll throw a link down below where he talks about a bunch of things, including this conversation. And there's also going to be a conversation we're having about previews versus reviews. Totally separate conversation, but also there. And so with that, James, how are you today?
What's up, y'all? I'm great. I think it's this is going to be a very interesting conversation. I think there will be a lot of comments in your comment section because there's going to be some opinions. Because I'll just go ahead and get, within the first 2 minutes, we'll just get the fire going, right? There's a weird intersection around this whole thing of unfettered capitalism versus nationalism. These crossroad in such the weirdest way, right? Because you'll see the same people who defend capitalism and how it's the best system, right? Which is what's led us to where we're at now, right? This is where we make the product the cheapest so that we're able to offer it at the best price. The market's doing what the market's supposed to do, right? Versus, why don't we do it here? Nationalism, which is now counter to that. So again, it's a weird crossroads, but happy to dive into
and for context on this, I should have started with this. For those who don't know what's going on, the very, very, very short version of everything is we love board games, or at least I love board games. Hopefully, if you're here, you probably love board games too, and we like to get a lot of board games. And board games for a very long time, a large percentage of them, a large majority of them have been made overseas, which worked great until this little thing called COVID happened, and the world blew up, and freight prices exploded, and I'm condensing a whole lot of information to a very short time frame, but the important part that you need to know is that freight prices over the past year or so have gone up, depending on where you are, anywhere from 400 to 600%, which is an insane number. That means a container that used to cost you somewhere in the range of 4,000 to 6,000 is now costing you somewhere in the range of 18,000 to 25,000, which is absolutely insane, especially if you're shipping multiple containers. This has led to
I had one container. It was 33,000 and change.
It's brutal. It's absolutely brutal. It's insane.
Yeah.
But this has led to publishers losing a lot of money, to publishers asking backers for money, to increased shipping prices on Kickstarters, and to more and more conversations around, well, it's just costing us more, so we have to pass those costs on. And this, in turn, has led to a lot of people very reasonably saying, great, I hear you, let's start making it in the USA. Let's start bringing it home. If it costs so much to make it internationally, let's bring it home and make it here. And the answer to that is a very strong, it's a lot more complicated than you think.
It is, and I did a whole video on this before. I've been in many comment threads on social media talking about this, and the U.S. does have Carta Monday is a great one. There's several that are here in the U.S., but their capabilities are very limited. And their capacity is very limited. So like Carta Monday is a great example. We made Super Fight at Skybound. We made it almost there exclusively over its 7 years, right there in Texas. But there was a lot of negative things about that too. It was long wait times on the print runs. It was 3 to 4 times as much as it would be if we had it made in China. And and the card quality was very limited, right, because of the materials that they can get sourced here in the U.S. And that's typical across any of the production facilities that they have. I think one of the examples that was thrown up in the conversation that I had was having was Stardew Valley. That was done in the U.S.
Who was it?
But Stardew Valley was pretty expensive for what was in that box. So again, the proof is in the pudding there, as they'll say, right? Like if that game's made in China, it's probably $10 to $20 less on the MSRP. Um, so anyway, there's a lot of factors there, but the big thing is this was something infrastructurally wise. We as a country decided, I guess it was around Reagan, 70s, 80s, right, that we were going to shift to more tech development, less manufacturing, and so all that manufacturing moved out and went overseas. And China jumped on that, and China's done a good job of really building up their infrastructure to be able to support that industry in their country.
Yeah, because the two things I've frequently
And
seen bandied around a lot are one, and we touched upon both these already to a degree. Are one of it is the cost itself, just literally just the cost. There is more of a cost here, and so yes, freight prices are increasing, but you have to get to a certain point before that increase turns it into a conversation where that cost even makes sense. But that's right when you have that conversation, even before you get there, that's when you hit point two, which is literally just capabilities, capacities. Are we able to? Do we have the knowledge? I know I've seen Marcin from Awakened Realms talk about how the miniature production in the US just isn't up to par. Card production, one thing, tokens maybe, miniature production, which a lot of these big box Kickstarters are, I know he said they just don't have the quality that China spent years developing skills and knowledge and machines and stuff that just we don't have that up yet.
yeah, it doesn't exist here, right? So, but there's a lot of people saying, well, I don't care about minis, so I don't care. Make my games in the U.S. But the problem is, like, there is a certain level that a consumer of board games expects out of their games now, right? Like, so if you opened up a box and the cards are super flimsy and the die cut on your punch boards didn't cut all the way through, and when you push them out, all the
Cheers.
tokens are tearing, and
Mm-hmm.
right, like those are things that or if the box is really flimsy, right? Like you push in on it a little bit, and you're like, man, this box is cheap. You're gonna notice all those things, right? And that's unfortunately the capabilities that we have here in the U.S. Like they are limited. I'm not saying they're all going to make garbage product, but when you look at them comparatively, right, they're not close, right? What we can get, but also with the materials that they can source in China, are vastly bigger, right? So that our choices are more, so we can have more customized items. And this isn't even talking about, like, this is wooden meeples and screen printing them and just things that aren't necessarily even plastic, but even dice. Like dice is a different. There's so many more options if you're making it overseas than if you're making it in the U.S.
Okay, so I guess I'd say as a starting baseline, my kind of assumption, and this is one of those things where I always find fascinating. To a certain degree, you always see a lot of comments like just make it in the U.S. if it costs so much. And my first thought is usually, if they could, they probably would. I mean, they want to save money more than you. To you, this is a board game. To them, this is often your living. If you can cut those costs easily enough, do so.
Yep.
So why not? But then the second follow-up question that usually ends up in this conversation is, okay, great, I accept it. We can't do it. Let's do it. Why not? I mean, one thing I know I've seen is the idea, the fear that freight prices will never come down to what they were. They might drop down, but they won't drop down to what they were. I've seen that touted many times, and I don't know if it's true or not, but I understand the rationale behind it. And so at a certain point, there does become a conversation. Okay, so at what point do we want to start investing in infrastructure here? Like, what's that cost? What's the next step to ensuring we're not beholden to this problem forever?
Yeah, the infrastructure is a okay. So there's two buckets there of what you just talked
Yeah.
about, right? So just make it in the U.S. Cool. If everybody's cool with their prices increasing 30 to 50% across the board, every game costing at minimum 30 to 40% more, then sure. And the quality coming down, right? So it's going to cost you more, and it's going to be less quality, and you're going to have less variety in the box. Who's signing up for that? Literally no one. No one. People, I think, sentimentally say yes to that, but if that was the actual products on the shelf, they'd be very upset. Okay, so there's that. So then the second part of that is, it's more than just board gamers saying we want the U.S. to reinvest back in manufacturing. That's a national scale, right? That affects every industry, not just board gaming.
I'm glad
So
you touched upon
it's
this.
a much bigger conversation. You got to get lobbyists involved. You've got to go to the government. The government has to get involved and subsidize that kind of thing and make it a movement. It's not just. But I honestly, I don't think Americans are interested overall in manufacturing jobs.
Yeah.
Right? The reason they moved away is because we weren't interested as a society in building up that part of our economy. We focused on the tech side. And so again, I think it's that what I alluded to at the beginning, capitalism, nationalism, butting heads, and then sentimentally people going, I want this stuff here because there's some sort of that we check some box when we see that made in America, like on a product. And I guess I can understand some of that, but the other part of that is like we all want stuff as cheap as possible at the best price
Well, so I
possible.
think
So, like you
yeah.
alluded to earlier, like if we could make it here and it checked that box, we would do it.
Yeah.
Board game publishers are not anti-American when it comes to like making things. It's just we're trying to make the business numbers work. We know you won't pay a 30 to 40% increase for a lesser product, so our hands are kind of tied.
Yeah, you touched upon several things that are very relevant. The first is that I think regarding the nationalism aspect, I think there always is that little bit of pride, and we also want things cheaper, which this current storm of events has led to a situation where we can kind of solve the cheaper problem mentally. Not we can, but we want to. I think that people want to solve the cheaper problem by going nationalist. It's like, oh, well, we want it cheaper, and the prices are going up. Now's when we can be nationalists. Now's when we can actually sit there and save money and be a little bit more, prideful of America and bring it home because we're trying to fix this whole freight crisis, and all the shipping costs that are going up there. And so if we bring it home, we get to have our cake and eat it too. We get to be nationalists and save money, which I think the problem is, as you're saying, it's just not true. That's not how it works. You can save the disparity between the two might have gone down, but the cost is still significantly higher, which is why those.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's not even with the increase of the freight pricing, right, of the ocean freight and fulfillment to door, all that's went up. That cost per unit still doesn't justify the loss of quality that we would have by making it here, and it would still probably, I would say, probably still average out to be about the same cost. The big thing. So, and I'm gonna diverge a little bit, but. So one of the things that we were able to do in the past as publishers, right, is we would absorb some of those shipping costs. You've seen this on Kickstarter, right? In the last year, people are like, no more subsidization of shipping. We can't cover your VAT. You got to pay for it. And we've seen that. Like I know the CMON was a very eye-opening situation for a lot of people. But when they're shipping half a pallet worth of product, it's expensive. But so in the past, though, in our P&L, it's a profit and loss kind of spreadsheet, right, for a project. You could say, cool, we're going to subsidize. Here's how free shipping used to work, right? Okay, if I sell a game into retail, it goes through distro. Distro buys it at a deep discount, right? Yep. So the cost of your product, you still need to be able to make money on that when you sell it to them, who then they mark it up and then sell it to retailers. Now, unfortunately, publishers, we don't get a choice in this system. This system's the way it's been, this is the way it's going to be, and we can't affect it. Trust me, I've tried. Other people have tried. We've tried. Okay? So when you sell something direct to a customer, you've only really got your platform fees that's coming out of that price. So in the past, we were able to go, all right, well, I only normally get 40% when I sell a games of the MSRP. I only get 40% of that when I sell it there. Okay, well, I'm getting 80% when I sell it direct to customer. So if my cost, the shipping cost is X amount of dollars, which lowers it 25%, I'm still making more selling it here than I am selling it here. So I can absorb those costs and say, free shipping to you. This is obviously also one of the things that Amazon does, right? They run out their purpose though is they'll even take a loss to get rid of competition, and then they can raise the price after the competition's gone because you don't have anywhere else to go. We don't have that problem here. So what's happened is when the ocean freight skyrocketed on us, all of that room that we had in those P&Ls is gone. So we don't have that room in the product profit margin to absorb that anymore. So it's all gone. And for us to still make, because again, I don't know, I don't personally know. Not everybody talks very transparent about their numbers. That's their prerogative. But I know for us, we're just looking to try to hit a very normal 30% profit margin on our products. Um, because I don't know, I'm not trying to drive Lamborghinis, and I'm not trying to pull the wool over on anybody. And so when you're like, cool, if you don't have that profit margin, there's also problems, right? So that's when you can't buy another print run. And you'll see people that have a successful game
Yeah.
that goes out, people like it, they love it, but then they're like, I have to go back to Kickstarter to get another print run. We don't have any more games. That's because there wasn't enough profit from the first set of games they made to be able to reinvest in something. So they have to go back. And or if there's any issues, you need that profit margin. So like, oh gosh, there's a pandemic and the prices go up on ocean freight. I can cover. I don't have to come back to you and ask you for more money. Again, I know this is a parallel conversation, but it is relevant to why all these things matter and why we're making the choices that we make
Yeah.
as
No,
publishers.
sure. So we're talking about the profit margin, which I just lost the thread of the conversation. So we're talking about the profit margins, the increased cost, the freight, all that. So we would. So you mentioned that point. That's the point I want to touch upon. If we could make it cheaper here, we would, which is something that I think is fascinating because to a certain extent, a large percentage of people kind of assume we're a special magical snowflake in board games. Like, hey, we'll solve this board game problem by bringing it back in. But I think that the key part is that whole we would if we could aspect, meaning every industry currently is affected in different ways to different percentages. Board games arguably more so because we have lower profit margins than some industries. But like all industries, like all those chips you can't get, those PlayStations you can't buy, those shortages on your shelf, any number of different things going on in this pandemic and causing all these issues with anything coming from anywhere that's not domestically raised or domestically grown or produced or whatever it is, they're happening left, right, and center. And we're not going to massively see that return to manufacturing. It could be that it'd be nice to see it at some point. It's possible, but they're talking about huge, like you said, huge national increases or investments into production to make
Yeah.
that happen. And like you said, people who don't want those jobs, we spent years as a country saying focus on other jobs, focus on tech, focus on a degree. The idea of just manual labor and being involved in a factory, the idea of like somebody suit covered person coming home from the steel mill, that's not the same kind of thing you envision anymore for a reason.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in Alabama. I worked on a farm my whole life growing up. So like, I chunked bales of hay. I have no issues with any of that. But I think as a society, there was especially in the 90s and the early 2000s, there was a big push for kids to go to
Yeah.
college, right? Again, we're really getting off course here a little bit, but that is where our society as the U.S. went. That's what we told kids to be successful and to grow up and have a bunch of money and do the things that you want to do. You've got to go to college and get a white collar job.
Yeah.
And so it was all a part of this package that has now got us where we are now, right? And I think you'll have a lot of people argue that they were also, I don't want to say lied to, or it didn't follow through. The follow through is not there on those college degrees, right? People have a ton of student loan debt. They have multiple degrees and they're making $50,000 a year, which is just not, with inflation,
Yeah.
not working. So the other thing that kind of touches on that point too is, if the capabilities were here in the U.S., I think publishers would happily make it here because there are so many hurdles we jump over to work with China, right? Like there's a language barrier, right? Like we're talking about intricate pieces of engineering that have to happen on lots of these campaigns and products that lots can get lost in translation. And so sometimes like it is a big headache to go back and forth with someone's whose English is a second language to them, right? There's all kinds of, obviously delays. It takes so much longer to make it over there and to get it where it needs to go. Right now during the pandemic, this is very specific, but like China approaches lockdowns in a much different way than everybody else. So like right now, the factory that I work with, they've been locked down for a week because they had a mini outbreak of COVID. And so they just lock everything down for a full week. So you lose a whole week of production and back and forth. So yeah, it's not publishers are favoring any one region over another. That's just where the business makes us make it.
What is the next step? I mean, practically speaking, if we're looking at potentially increased freight pricing, and we're not sure what pace will go down. Does this just mean that board games are and will be more expensive? Does it mean that eventually there might be a shift? Does it mean that what does it mean? Like practically speaking, it might just mean board games are more expensive. That's not something anyone wants to hear. We all want to think it's a short-term problem. Is it?
Well, if I knew the answer to that, I'd be rich. But I think the short term answer is yeah. I think board games are going to be more expensive. Um, you know, is there ways to like? Will people get inspired to build factories back in the U.S. or back on this side of the planet and make something work? I think so, but I think the problem is that when investors, people who have a lot of money to invest, they don't look at an industry like ours and go, well, there's a place to make a ton of money, right? They're looking at other industries where the returns are much higher. And so I don't think we're going to get a lot of outside help in board gaming specifically. I do think we'll probably see some return to manufacturing in the US in some fields and some industries. I just don't know if it's going to be board games or not. Again, because we're very, very niche, like
And what's
I
the
mean, as much as we would all love for everybody in the U.S. and on the planet to own like this big pile of board games that we have, because we know the magic of board gaming,
sure?
right? I'm a board game evangelist. I want families to play board games. I spent last Friday out at my kids' end of the year thing for school, talking to people. I wear my D&D hat. I get out there and and we gave a big board game like gift basket away at the little raffle, and I sat there and talked to people about board games, and they're like, oh yeah, same conversations we've
Yeah,
always Scrabble, Monopoly, yeah, yeah, yeah,
100%.
yeah, yeah.
That and code names.
Try
Yeah.
these. So I want people to have them, but there's just these barriers that we got to get through, and investors also see those as well, right? They see the total amount of money, and board games isn't as small as it used to be, but it still doesn't compare to some of these other industries.
So what about the what does the freight container industry look like? Like how many people own these freight liners? I mean, in theory, if you just suddenly massively jacked up the prices 400, 600%, in theory, there's an opening for people to walk in there and say, hey, we're going to be the Zenny Optical of freight liners. We're going to come in with somehow manage to make everything cheaper, make it work, and we're going to, like, I mean, I can't imagine how the investment to do something like that, but is there an opening for something like that? Maybe that's somewhere where someone can, and it's not necessarily board game focused, it's just freight focused.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, this is an area that's a little bit obviously outside of my expertise, so I don't want everything I'm saying at this point is just
Conjecture.
is more assumption based than anything else. But I think I have seen some other conversations around this, and I think it's just the investment for those boats, right? Like
How
those
much are they?
ships are
50 million,
not
100 million?
cheap.
I have no clue. I have zero knowledge.
Uh, I have no
Yeah.
idea. And then plus, I think it's also running a logistics company that's ship maintenance and ports in all the different countries and all the fees and the literal logistics of running something like that. I don't think is very easy. So I don't think people are like hopping in line to do that. But what we all hope,
Mm-hmm.
right? We all hope that the market settles down a little bit and that people like gets back into good old capitalism, and some of these competing companies start trying to undercut each other to get the business. Because the problem right now is that because we were all consuming so much stuff over the last 2 years because we were all staying at home, we started consuming more. So they started making more, and all the stuff had to be shipped. So there was no down flux. There was no reason for anybody to lower the prices because every ship was at capacity at all times. They didn't have to lower the prices. So until that consumption goes back down a bit and we see a dip and people then have to start outbidding each other, to fill up their ships, those prices really aren't coming down. And I think you alluded to it earlier. Right now I think the average pricing that I'm seeing on a 40-footer is in that $26,000 to $27,000 range is kind of where it's at, and they used to be six.
It's insanity.
I think everybody knows we're never going back to six. Six will never see that again. But I think everybody's just hoping, could it land the new normal somewhere between 15 and 20? I mean, that'd be this sounds
It does
awful
sound awful.
to
It sounds
say,
awful.
but that'd be great. that'd be great right now if it went back down to 15.
Yeah, because
So
I know in general, when you see these large influxes in a price point and the market manages to sustain that, what you've really just done is you've really just shown people that there's different points at the market is willing to sustain different things. This is not that dissimilar to this very idea that we have $100 board games to begin with. You go back 10 years ago,
right.
$100 board games weren't a thing. I mean, you look at games. I still remember when Eclipse came out, and that was a game that cost like $60, and people were like, $60 for a board game? That's a lot. I can get like Tzolk'in for 40. Why would I get Eclipse for 60? I have to really, really want Eclipse to get that game. And like the idea of that being the price point now, it's like it's laughable. And granted, you get more stuff, but like the Kickstarter price point in general, any market can, as long as people are willing to pay, we just find out what the market can bear. And that might come from paying because you want the product. It might come from paying because you have the profit margins. It might be that you have to then charge more to justify the profit margins, but the people on the other end want the product. It's just pushing an industry at all its various points and trying to see how far it can squeeze. And the downside, the downsides are multiple. The downsides are more expensive games. The downsides are companies going under who can't hit that squeeze in a different way. The downsides are people shifting to doing this part-time instead of full-time. People who were doing it part-time hoping to make it full-time.
Kickstarters being canceled.
It's I mean, like it's scary to see what's out there, and scary in the sense that, I mean, in our space, to many of us, to many viewing this, the thing you're missing out on is a game. The thing that's more expensive for you is a game. The thing that I constantly try to push upon is the idea that there are people whose jobs are at stake, or the people whose lives, the things they've invested the past 10 years of their life into, they're seeing that completely adjust around them. It's an entirely different conversation for them than for you.
Yeah, I mean, we're already seeing it, right? Like we saw it with there was a cancellation, and not just a cancellation of that Game Found,
Youthia.
but they were like, we're closing
Yeah.
the doors, right? Because there's so much threat to your livelihood when you're like, if I can't securely like plan on revenue coming in to be able to support myself and my employees, then I need to go do something else to take care of my family, right? Because I can't risk it. And I think what we're really going to see, obviously, is we're going to see a lot of indie publishers get out.
Yeah.
We're going to see a lot of people who can't get in, and that's what's sad, because that's going to give us a lot of the same old, right? Because the bigger corporations, having just came out of a bigger company who focuses on more profit-driven ideology than anything else, is you're not looking to innovate. You're looking to what can we make that's going to make money.
Safe bets.
And that's not why I got into making board games, right? In fact, that's the exact reason why I got it. The exact opposite reason of why I got into board games. I came out of the corporate world where I was constantly being harassed about my growth numbers for the next quarter, and I soul sucking. And what it's going to end up doing is going to end up making us have a lot of very samey type games where something becomes popular, and then we have to have 7,000 variations of that thing because we know people will buy it. Or we get one thing that's really good, and then we have to skin it in every IP known to man because that's what's going to sell, and we know it's going to. And we're not going to have nearly as many innovative games, which is sad.
Yeah. I mean, it is what it is. It's unfortunate. And
it's a great example is Bloodstone, which I know is a really fun topic for you. You have very very big opinions about Bloodstone, but like in my revamping of Bloodstone before I bring it back, one of the things I'm looking at is how do I make it as affordable as possible. But even my most affordable attempt of what's going to end up like when you have miniatures that are chunky and big, it's going to be a certain amount of money, right? Like I can't get it under a certain number. At this point, I'm feeling like that number is 150. I don't see how I make a deluxe with all the minis and there's like almost 100 dice in the game. I don't see how I make that big deluxeified version for less than 150. I think initially it was 200. I'm taking a much different approach on this relaunch. I mean, I'm gonna have some sort of retail edition, so I can cut out all the plastic and get the cost down. I'm gonna split it up where it's not just a all in one. You have the PvP and the PvE to be able to break it apart so that people can just get what they want, type of thing. So if you want to be able to get down to just the cardboard, there might be, I think, probably somewhere close to a $50 entry point so that it's affordable. But like, I don't know, man. Like, I can't pull off a CMON. I can't do a 24-day campaign, and every day there's multiple stretch goals of plastic coming into the game. It just doesn't. The math doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
Uh, anyway,
No,
sorry,
this the whole
tangent.
thing. Everything's a tangent here at this point. Everything comes down to, at the end of the day, I think the main takeaway from all of this really is to me, the reason I want to do this subject is because I keep seeing people talk about let's make it in the USA, and I replied to comments and I post things here and there. I posted links to your video, but like I think there's a large gap in understanding that the people who are most incentivized here, the people who are most interested in getting those prices down, getting the state of the world back to normal, the people who are most want that to happen are the publishers. Like for them, they're trying to be in a space they love, and they're trying to do so while paying the bills as much as possible. And
Yeah.
paying the bills is a key factor. At the end of the day, like when people love to throw around profit like it's a dirty word. Like the idea that if someone says like, hey, and I'm not talking about you or this, or that, I'm saying general numbers. If someone's like, hey, I'd love to make a company, I make board games, and I'd love to like make 90K a year. Some people are like, make 90K a year, you should make 50K a year. Well, maybe, but also that person might be
Yeah.
able to get a job at 90 to 100K a year, maybe 120K a year. It could be that person's turning down more money to already be in a hobby they love, and so profit can't be a dirty word if you want people to actually be in this industry. But it's they're the ones who are going to try to find those pathways. They're the ones who are going to try to find the ways to make it cheaper. Can you make it in the U.S. in a cheaper, more affordable way? If we could, someone there is going to find it. But like, it's not easy, and it's significantly more complicated. And like the point that you said at the beginning is, best case scenario, you're still looking at it being more expensive for less quality. So if your goal is that, if your goal is nationalism despite the quality and price point, that's one conversation. But if your goal is solving the price point by bringing it to the US, we're not there yet.
Nope. No, and I think capacity and timelines, because like even when things got really really bad during COVID, we could and things were backed up. We looked at like, hey, Carter Monday, because we needed to do some reprints of Trial by Trolley, and we were like, so okay, yeah, we'll pay the 4 times as much as it's going to be for the units, but they're like, hey, we're still 3 months out because our capacity slammed because everybody else is asking us the same question. And so then it's like, well, that doesn't actually help us, right? Like you taking 3 months before you can even get us into the factory and start production, we might as well just sit in line and wait and have a lower price. So it's if it's not, there's so many variables. This is what I always try to explain to backers too. There's a butterfly effect. So when you make a change on this spinning plate, it affects all the plates that it's touching. And sometimes you go to make that adjustment and it just keeps butterfly affecting, domino effect, touching these other categories that then can cause more problems for the publisher and costs. And so you have to look at it holistically. How does the whole thing work, not just this one? So it's easy to get on in your armchair quarterback and say, this is what we should do for this one lane, but that one lane touches 30 other lanes that have to be taken into account.
Yeah. Okay, well, on that depressing note, James, thanks so much for coming on the show. I mean, that's it is. I think honestly, the point of this video, as far as I was concerned, was not a solution. The point was reminding people that the problem is not easily solved. So it is a slightly depressing note. The things are slightly headed in a semi-right direction, but even that's so unstable. And like even as freight prices come down a drop, we're still seeing suddenly fuel surcharges on the final mile being tacked on. So like you're seeing things in one side improve a drop, and you're seeing things on the other side move up. It's not simple. It is complicated. Board games will be more expensive. Back accordingly. Get what you want. Have sympathy for the publisher. I'm not saying back. That's up to you. But have sympathy for the publisher, who I guarantee you is in a tougher spot than you are, as they sit there and try to figure out what price point will not scare off every single person, but allow them to pay their bills. It's a much harder position for them. It really is.
My call to anybody watching who backs things, especially in crowdfunding, is just, pick out your top 20, top 10, whatever your number is, publishers, and then, try to support them best you can. But I understand we all have budgets, right? Like we're all looking at reduced income and inflation, and that has to have an impact on all of our budgets. It has on mine. I don't back as many things as I used to. The other part of that is, there will be a survival of the fittest amongst publishers too. So who makes the best products with these conditions? That's the way it's always been, and that's not going to
Yeah.
change.
Yeah. James, thanks so much for being on here. Everyone, I'll have a link down below to James' channel where you can check out both the prior video on this conversation as well as multiple other things around the industry, and supposedly based on the multiple angry people who want him to keep posting content, apparently there'll be more and more things out there. But otherwise, until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Boarding & Co. James, appreciate it, and have a good one.
Thanks for having me.